Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Impress with coverage of round 9 of Tata Steel 2021. Let's first look at the standings after the 8th round. 17-year-old Alireza Firouzja leads the Tata Steel tournament with 5.5 points out of 8 games. He even started with a loss in round 1. 4 players half a point behind him: Van Foreest, Caruana, Giri and Yesipenko, who had that great win against Magnus Carlsen in round 8. Niels Grandelius on his own at 4.5 and 2 players on 50%. Hari Krishna and Carlsen with both 1 win, 1 loss and 6 draws. Voytashek is on -1 and 4 players on 3 points: Vachela Graf, Tari Duda and Anton Guijarro. Alexander Donchenko is in 14th and last place with 5 draws and 3 losses. Round 9 was played on Tuesday the 26th of January and these were the pairings: Giri, Vachela Graf, Voytashek, Caruana, Carlsen Grandelius, Firouzja, Yesipenko, Anton Guijarro against Hari Krishna, Tari Duda and Van Foreest against Donchenko. In this video we're going to look at the game between Voytashek and Caruana and we'll pick out one very nice position from the Carlsen Grandelius game. Here we see the two players: Radoslavvoytashek on the left with the white pieces against Fabiano Caruana, the number 2 player in the world from the USA. Let's have a look how the game went. Voytashek opened with the c-pawn, knight f6, knight f3, d6, d4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4 and castling. This was a big surprise, the first time that Fabiano Caruana plays the King's Indian defense in a classical game. He said afterwards that he thinks that the King's Indian has a lot of potential that we didn't realize. So will Caruana suddenly become a King's Indian player? The future will tell. Bishop e2, e5, castling from white and bishop g4. Here d5 is the main move, but Voytashek played bishop e3 instead. And Caruana took on f3, and this is also rare. Black giving up the bishop pair voluntarily. And it's also Black's good bishop. The other one is more or less buried on g7. So this is the modern way to play the King's Indian. Voytashek recaptured with the bishop. E takes d4, bishop takes d4 and knight c6, kicking this bishop back to where it came from. That bishop only had 1 knight stay on d4, as Grandmaster Hess put it in his commentary in the live broadcast. Rook e8, queen d2, knight d7. Voytashek is centralizing the rook. And now look at this move. On move 13, Fabiano Caruana picked up his bishop on g7 and took the knight on c3. Grandmaster Robert Hess had just explained in the broadcast that bishop g7 is the best minor piece on the board, and Caruana is just giving it up for the knight. And the Bosnian Grandmaster Ivan Sokolov tweeted, "If this decision is good for Black, I need to learn chess again." Geller is probably turning in his grave, and that refers to the Soviet Grandmaster Efim Geller, who loved to put the bishop on g7 when he was Black in all sorts of openings, and he really loved the power of that bishop. And this picture tells a story. This is the face of Radoslavvoytashek after Caruana had taken on c3. He was also stunned by that move. Caruana himself said after the game, "I did not know if bishop takes c3 was correct in this exact position, but I've seen it in similar positions where white can't really free himself. If white gets g3 and bishop g2 in, then Black's position is completely awful, but he never gets it." Let's have a look at what happened and then we'll understand what Caruana means. Voytashek recaptured on c3 with the queen. Queen f6, and white does not want to swap queens because the whole point is that this pawn on e4 is weak. If you swap queens, the knight takes back and then this pawn is attacked twice and only defended once, and you cannot defend it again. Black will win a pawn. After queen f6, queen c2 is the move according to Caruana, and he indicated that this was the way to play. "I don't win a pawn, but I just hold him." And he gave this variation. He said, "I play knight c5, and after rook fe1 I play a5 to secure the knight on c5, followed by rook e7, and he said white cannot redeploy his bishops without losing the e4 pawn. So in this position, according to Caruana, white should have played queen c2. But Wojtaszek played queen c1 instead. Knight c5 and now queen b1. Caruana said after the game, Wojtaszek misplayed it. This can't be the way to play queen c1 and then queen b1. He said Wojtaszek was trying to sacrifice the e4 pawn in the best way, but this clearly was not the best way. Caruana played queen e6, attacking the e4 pawn 3 times now. With queen, rook and knight, it's only protected by the bishop and the queen. And Caruana is also attacking the c4 pawn with his queen. Here Caruana felt he was better, but it was difficult to figure out how much better. Let's see how the game continued. Rook fe1 from Wojtaszek, and knight takes e4 is possible. You can take that pawn, but Caruana decided to take the c-pawn. The engine agrees that is a better move. b3 kicking the queen, queen c3, bishop d2 attacking the queen again, queen back to f6, and bishop c1 on its way to b2, and that beautiful diagonal. h5 from black, and there goes that bishop to b2. And this was Wojtaszek's idea. He hopes that this beautiful bishop, the counterpart of bishop g7, which Caruana so surprisingly swapped for a knight, will give him compensation for the pawn. The bishop is attacking the queen, so knight e5 was played, interposing the knights. Bishop e2, h4, queen c1 and g5. Caruana said afterwards that he felt he was better, but that there were so many possibilities for black to continue, and that it was hard to choose. We have the bishop pair against the knight pair with an extra pawn for black. The game goes on. Bishop b5 hitting the rook. Caruana saves his rook. Rook e3, queen g6, and the bishop goes back to e2. Creative play from Wojtaszek. The bishop went to b5 with a tempo on the black rook and now returns to e2 after letting its own rook move to the 3rd rank. In this position, can we take on e4? That pawn is hanging, but it's not a very good move because of bishop f3. And if we now take on f3, then there is g takes f3, and this wins a piece for white because the rook on e7 is unprotected, so the knight cannot play. If after knight takes e4, bishop f3, you play knight f6 instead, then there is bishop takes b7, and that bishop has come to life, and white is okay now. So this after bishop e2 and then taking on e4, which Caruana did not do because he saw these variations and he played rook a to e8. Queen c2, knight e6, f3 and knight f4. Attacking is easier than defending, as I was taught, and that is also true at the highest level, and Wojtaszek's task to contain black's attack is a tough one. He played bishop f1, and you can play g4 here, and that is a move we see a lot in the King's Indian, black pushing his g-pawn through. The engine likes this move, but Caruana is not in a hurry and is preparing to advance in the center. Instead of g4 he played c6. Queen f2, rook e6, rook c3, and there that thrust in the center, d5. g3 attacking the knight, and Caruana thought that after this move he was winning. He thought this was a mistake. If you take on g3, the engine gives that move as the strongest move. H takes g3 and then g4. Black is indeed winning. But Caruana decides to sacrifice a piece straight away. After g3, he did not take on g3, he played d takes e4. Leaves that knight hanging. F takes e4 is the best move in this very complicated position, but Wojtaszek decided to grab the piece, leaving it to Caruana to prove that this piece sacrifice is correct. Caruana recaptured, opening the g-file, check to the king, and now, according to the engine, white could have saved himself with king h1, and black has enough compensation for the piece, but not more than that. In the game, queen g2 was played, and that is a mistake. It's forcing a queen exchange. It's understandable that Wojtaszek played it this way, because if you can get the queens off the board, that usually slows down the attack, and white is a piece up. Caruana played e4 takes f3, very good move, black is winning. Yes, the queens come off the board. This is check, king h1 and f2, which is threatening rook g1, and that is checkmate. So bishop h3 was played to cover the g1 square with the rook. And now look at this move, a very beautiful move from Caruana. Knight e5 to c4, the killer move. What a beautiful move. Opening up the e-file with a tempo on the bishop. This file is now open and the bishop is attacked. And white cannot keep everything together anymore. Wojtaszek took on c4, took the piece, but after rook e1 check he resigned because it's checkmate in 2 moves from here. If you interpose the bishop, it's checkmate straight away. And if you take the rook, then black promotes. You have to interpose the bishop and checkmate. What a great attack from Caruana. So after rook e1 check, Wojtaszek resigned and Caruana had won a wonderful game with the black pieces in the King's Indian. And there was Grandmaster Ivan Sokolov again. After the game he said, well, difficult, impossible to argue with success. Well done, Fabiano and your team. Many more lines will be written about this very complicated game in this analysis. I've only scratched the surface. I promise you a position from the Carlsen Grandelius game. First a few screenshots from the world champion, which I took from the live broadcast. This is a nice one with Carlsen looking into the camera, and this one is even nicer. Carlsen in deep thought, trying to turn his tournament around. And to be able to do that, he had to beat Niels Grandelius, the early leader of the Tata Steel tournament. The opening was a Najdorf Sicilian. We have seen many Najdorfs in this tournament, which is great. And this is the position after the 36th move, queen d5 to e5 from Carlsen, who is behind the white pieces. If we do a body count, we see that white is a pawn up in an endgame. And with his last move, Carlsen is attacking the rook on b8. And Grandelius played queen b2 to protect his rook, but he also brought a devilish trick into the position. And that's really very beautiful, and that's why I wanted to show you this position. Because what is there against rook c7? It was not played by Carlsen, he saw the trick. Rook c7 looks devastating for black because of the mate threat on g7. It looks like you have to play rook g8, putting your rook into a passive position, which you don't want to do in an endgame when you're already a pawn down. But after rook c7, Grandelius had planned d4, d3. What a move that is. It's attacking the queen. If you capture on b2, then there is rook takes b2, and now c takes d3 is an illegal move because of the pin. In fact, black wins a pawn back with a drawn position. But let's go back after d3. White has the well-known trick with rook c8 check, a famous way to deflect the rook and win the queen, but in fact in this case it will blow up in white's face. Rook takes c8 is forced, and then you lose your queen. Has white now won a queen for a rook? No, he hasn't, because there is rook takes c2 check at the end of this variation, and that is a rook fork. It wins back the queen and the game. You have to give up your queen for the rook, and then there is d takes c2, and that pawn will go through to queen. Black wins. So let's look at it again. After queen e5, queen b2 was played, and if you then play rook c7, which looks very good for white, there is suddenly d3. What a move. Covering the checkmate on g7, and the tactics work for black. The position is about equal now after this tactical shot. In the game after queen b2, Carlsen saw these variations, did not play rook c7, he played rook c6, threatening to take on h6 because the g-pawn is pinned. Grandelius played king h7 on move 37, and 30 moves later the world champion was able to convert his extra pawn. I will not show you that long endgame, but I hope you enjoyed this little tactical skirmish. Let's go to the results of round 9. Anish Giri beat Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, who's having a bad tournament. Wojtaszek Caruana, we saw that one, and we saw a little snippet from Carlsen Grandelius. The other 4 games were drawn. Firuza Yesipenko, Anton Guijarro Rarikrishna, Tari Duda and Van Foreest Donchenko all finished undecided. And these are the standings after 9 rounds. Firouzja is still leading the Tata Steel tournament, but now has Caruana and Giri with him. 2 players half a point behind, Van Foreest and Jesipenko, and Magnus Carlsen is back on +1. 2 players on 50%, Hare Krishna and Grandelius. Grandelius is slowly dropping down the rankings. He was the early leader. And we have 4 players on 3.5, Voytashek, Anton Guijarro, Tari and Duda. Vashela Graf and Donchenko are at the bottom of the table. Round 10 will be played on Wednesday the 27th of January, and we have the pairings Vashela Graf Donchenko, the 2 bottom placed players against each other, Duda Van Foreest, Hare Krishna Tari, Jesipenko against Anton Guijarro, Grandelius Firouzja, and the number 2 in the world, Caruana against the number 1 in the world, Carlsen. Giri against Voytashek. The second white game for Giri in a row. I will be here after the round to tell you what happened. I hope you enjoyed this video, and that if you did, that you give it a thumbs up, that you subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel, and that you leave a comment. I will read them all and I will reply to them all. If you liked the video, it would be great if you could share it on social media by clicking the share button on YouTube. You can find me on Instagram, on Twitter and on Facebook. This is Rick for Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching.